Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. And today, this is my special birthday present to myself, spending time with Becky Hall. How are you, Becky?
I'm very well, and very happy birthday to you, Andrew.
No, I don't want to talk about that because we'll talk about numbers and stuff like that, and I'll go la 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 la. But anyway, yeah, no, this is a very good episode because I know that this is a very interesting topic. It's a very topic dear to my heart, and it's dear to your heart as well. As you get slightly above 21, then you think about lots of different things. As your offspring get into their 20s, which is what's happened to me, you start to think about different things. And yeah, it was there's interesting. I think there's a guy called Cody or something. So this writing group I'm part of now, this crazy writing group I'm part of, that I've decided to do since January. If you want to check it out, it's on Substack. I'm on X. I write these kind of wild kind of things about startups and stuff like that. But one of the things that there was a really interesting post by Tim Denning, who's like the kind of key, one of the him and Todd Bryson, the kind of the leaders of the group. And they talk about, there's this guy called Cody, I have to dig his name out, but basically says, what is, the cars that you've had during your life? And basically his cars was like, no car. Then it was like, I don't know, some kind of banger, yeah? Then basically some kind of like posh family car, yeah? Then it was a Ferrari. Then it was no car. Then it was like, I am here. So I put my version of that on Substack on the notes section a few days ago. And it's quite funny, some of the reactions from that. I'm not going to declare it on this episode what mine were, but if you go on to Substack, you might find it. Anyway.
Okay.
I mean, you have to do yours now, Becky.
I am, but
I'm asking you to do it now, right now, but anyway.
I'm going to look you up on Substack and see what if I can add mine.
Oh no! It'd be like this long list of all these different lists. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. So, mine was similar but not the same. Yeah. Anyway, lovely to have you on the show, and thank you so much for this time because I know you're a busy lady. So one of the reasons why, obviously, want to do with the G&T sessions is I search the world and try and curate, great people that would be great guests. And when I came across some of your work, I thought, my God, we must have Becky on this show because it relates to the G, I suppose. It relates to the G, I suppose, and the T. In the case, it relates to growth, yeah, because people go through a kind of a growth thing, and I know we'll talk about caterpillars later.
Yeah.
But it relates to gifted and talented, yeah.
Yes, of course it does. Yeah.
And there's so growth. I mean, I less so tech, but I think some of the stuff that you talk about is related to some of that as well. But I think the growth mindset, the Carol Dweck stuff that you touch on in chapter 1, etc. But yeah, I mean, I just really, really, really pleased you're here, and thank you for giving us the time. And I suppose the trigger for that was coming across your seminal work, which now I suppose is how old? How many years ago did you write that amazing? No, not a discography. It's an amazing book.
Thank you. It kind of is, though. It's kind of like an arc of my life. So I wrote my book. It was published in September 2021, which feels like such a long time ago in some ways. But but it was a book that was a long time in the making. So it's called The Art of Enough. And I had the idea for it in 2013. So it took a long time incubating and then got written in 2020, partly facilitated by various lockdowns, but also because I'd promised myself that I was going to write it or stop talking about writing it. That was my New Year's resolution in 2020.
You mean the procrastination scenario?
Yeah, exactly.
I can relate completely to that one as well.
I was like, I'm either going to stop saying I'm writing this goddamn book called The Art of Enough, or I'm going to write the thing, and I did. So yeah.
That's where you transfer between an upcoming author and being an author, I suppose, isn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'd written stuff like you do on social media. I'd written articles. I'd been interested in writing, but never written and been published in book form before. So that was a journey in itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that touched me very early on, I think there's stuff around. I mean, obviously you've got quite a good structure to it, which we'll go through some of these different sections. But I know that there was I know that, like from an organisational behaviour point of view, someone that I admire, and I've read a lot of his books, and someone that I think you actually met in person, wasn't it, was Charles Handy. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I was lucky enough to meet him. He was talking at a festival I was at, and I went up to him afterwards, and both because I've read his books like you, he was just a brilliant writer and wrote loads in the 80s and 90s, really. That was his heyday. He wrote a great book called The Empty Raincoat, I think, in the 1980s. Anyway, I went to talk to him, and he invited me, he and his wife invited me for breakfast to have a conversation about writing and for me to talk about my idea with him. And he was just lovely. He was a really nice man. His wife was also absolutely fabulous. She was a photographer. Both of them have sadly died now, but yeah, he was a real inspiration. And he had some great advice about writing as well. He was really good.
But didn't you say there was a certain, I mean, so it links back to the topic that you've written about, which is about this thing where, wasn't this thing where he gets to a certain level of, was it income or a certain level of time he's consumed, and then he switches his approach to things? Was that right?
Yeah. So we were talking about the concept of enough, and I'll explain, the versions of that. But we were talking about it in the context of what it is like, or what it feels like to stop, or to put yourself a sort of cap on what you're doing. And he said to me that what he and his wife did was they'd set themselves a maximum income target. So of course we're all used to minimum income targets, and we all work like crazy to get to that point. But he set himself a maximum income target, and he said that when he got to reach that limit, he would stop accepting work for the rest of the year, and he would then deliberately spend time he might have dedicated to work to something else. So he had other creative projects, or whether it would be charity work, or even just chilling out. I mean, the guy was in his 80s when he was saying this, so he was a fairly prolific person. And but it was I found it completely inspiring, because it's the first time I'd ever heard of anyone, and I'm in the space where I'm a freelancer, and I've worked in small businesses pretty much a lot of my career, but as a consultant and a coach and that sort of thing. But this idea of properly stopping and saying, no, okay, after I've reached X, I'm not going to take more work, I'm going to do something else, just felt very liberating, and also was really turned on its head the idea that you have to always accept work, and you have to always be growing. It's like, what else could you be doing? What would thriving look like? What would healthy life look like? So it was just a really interesting way of thinking about it. And there he was doing it.
Because that raises two things in my head about discipline. Having the discipline to say no when you've got to that level. But also about, I suppose it also drives choices, and it also drives diversity of what you do. Because you kind of like, and you're actually also, you're saying money and income is only one dimension of my life. It's not the most important thing. It's just one dimension of it. Is that right?
Yeah, totally.
He's saying once the pot is full, I can live on that, and then actually I can then spread my attention to other things that may want to add value, or may want to create more value somewhere.
Yeah, completely. And it's in, the bit of my book that I put it in is that there's a whole chapter on growth, and all the sort of economists and people that I quote, to include, former American presidents and things like that. So it's not just a sort of strand of economics, but are people who would say that GDP, which is how we measure success economically, is one strand of a healthy economy and of a healthy life. And similarly, on a personal note, our income stream is one strand of what it takes to live a healthy, successful, happy life. Of course, there's a minimum, and of course we all need to live well, but it's not the only thing. And of course there's loads of research which says, richness, wealth and happiness aren't sort of always in correlation, that actually there comes a point once you've got the level of income that you want, it actually doesn't necessarily lead you to happiness. There are loads of other things, that being alive is more than just earning money. Kind of obvious, but
yeah, I mean, does that link back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Does that link to like the self-actualization and the kind of shelter, and then you've got these different levels, haven't you? Is that the kind of reference point as well, you would say?
You could absolutely refer to Maslow. Yeah, exactly. That actually, and people who've built on it would sort of build on that self-actualization bit, that there's sort of levels of what it is to be human, which are way beyond our material needs and our physical needs. And actually, there's only so much that wealth can give you before it stops having that sort of meaning, and that there are other pursuits that then give you that. So, of course, we all know, you've just had a birthday, we're all getting older. Health, of course, matters.
I'm reversing. My age is reversing. Can you not tell? I'm looking younger.
Oh, you are looking very young.
For the people that are watching us on audio, yeah. I'm looking very young. Yeah, maybe not very on YouTube.
Young. But we all know we need to feed our physical needs, our spiritual needs, our mental needs. Like that, success and happiness aren't all dependent on income. Income's a strand, so it's about putting it in context. It's a part. It's a strand, not the whole, is what I'm really arguing.
But do you think that gets overemphasized in education and how we've been brought up based on generations? Do you think that's kind of like it's been that dimension's been over amplified, or am I just misreading that?
I think not with everybody. And I don't think if I was to sit down and spoke to most people that you say, what's the most important thing to you? They would say the only thing that matters to me is my income. They wouldn't. But when you look at the way that organisations and companies run, and when you look at the way that the media presents things, you could be, forgiven for thinking that the most important thing you ever need is to be rich, as opposed to happy and healthy. That it's not always there's an overemphasis, I think, which in corporate land is a big overemphasis, and in certain economic models is a big overemphasis, that I think misses the richness and diversity of what it is to be human. And I think it comes at a very high cost, because we often, if you overextend yourself in pursuit of wealth, then that's when you can possibly burn out or get ill or any of those things on a personal level.
Yeah, and I think that's that thing that you say that there's a lot of documented examples where people have achieved that. I don't know, the certain status financially, and then they felt like, as they say, I feel empty now. I've bought all my material things. I don't know what to do now. I'm kind of lost.
Yeah. Totally. I hear it a lot, actually, because I'm a leadership coach. I hear people say all I ever wanted to do was to get to this position in life, like the chief exec or onto the board or whatever, and work really hard to get there and do amazing things to get there, and then get there and realize that actually there's still an emptiness inside. So you can't just have external things to make you internally happy. We're more complex than that. That's what makes us interesting, right? As humans, it's what makes people interested in art and cars and life and sport.
Or no cars.
Or recreation.
Start no cars and you end at no cars.
I know, I love that. That cycle is a very enough concept, actually, that you think, okay, yeah, I'm sure it was fun for him to have a Ferrari for a bit, but it probably wasn't the thing that gave him the most happiness in life, and he doesn't need it anymore.
I actually had a Saab, but it wasn't my top one, but I had a Saab Turbo. Sorry to do. But then Tim Denning actually sent me a message over Substack. Which model? It's like, it's not that important.
They were nice cars, Saabs, weren't they? Yeah,
they were. Yeah, it was a nice family car. So I know we're jumping around a little bit, but that kind of the concept of that very hungry caterpillar. Mm-hmm. How would you describe that? Then is that what we were just talking about this kind of constantly wanted to feed on things? Is that the concept you were trying to get across there?
Yeah. And we've sort of started at the end, but it's all connected. So that my ideas around enough are very much from the inside out. And so the Very Hungry Caterpillar is a children's book from, I don't know, the 1960s and 70s. I read it as a child. Eric Carle, I think what he was called. I think he was from the Netherlands or somewhere. Anyway, he wrote this book where the caterpillar eats and eats and eats, and he eats his way through the book and can't stop eating. And then, of course, when he does stop eating, he becomes a chrysalis and then becomes a butterfly, but he doesn't know that. And I think that you could be forgiven that when you get into that mode of sort of the insatiable appetite that doesn't really fill you up, then we're in that territory where you think that the things that are going to make you happy, that you're going to just keep going for, aren't necessarily. But, the lovely thing about caterpillars is that then they do sort of disintegrate and become something else. And they don't get bigger when they're butterflies, although I suppose they get wings, but they transform themselves. So I'm more interested, and I would say this because I'm a coach and I sort of believe in personal development and growth and that sort of thing, that it's more interesting. The caterpillar becomes more interesting when he or she stops eating and consuming and thinking that that's all there is to life, and becomes able to fly and be beautiful and all those other things that butterflies can do. So it's a great analogy, I think, and partly because we would be foolish if we thought that the only purpose of a caterpillar is to eat all the time.
Well, also the body of the butterfly is smaller than the body of the caterpillar, isn't it, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, what you were trying to get across there was the insatiable nature sometimes of people gorging on a particular dimension, and actually, but then do they ever become a butterfly, or do they just stay as a caterpillar? I suppose that's the yin and the yang of that story, isn't it, I suppose?
That is. And the other lovely thing about that story that I can't not say because it's so fab is that caterpillars are born with these little cells inside them that are called imaginal cells, which they don't even know that they've got, of course. Who knows how conscious a caterpillar is, but they just aren't activated, and so they're just part of the caterpillar. And then as the caterpillar gets bigger, these imaginal cells are activated, and they are what basically turn the caterpillar into some sort of chrysalis and a goo, and then it recreates as a butterfly. And I really love, there's a sort of poetical, metaphorical way of thinking about that, which is that we all carry within us our means of our own transformation if we're just able to access it or give ourselves space for it. So there's a sort of lovely poetry in that we're more than just what we consume. We've got the capacity for, in this analogy, flight and beauty and, all the other things that I kind of said already that the human condition is. It's not just about surviving, and it's about thriving and how we can be the best of ourselves, and more sort of philosophical self-actualizing concepts, really.
But sometimes people don't appreciate that because they don't open that door to that conversation or that dimension, I suppose, do they? Or they don't get the opportunity potentially.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it goes back to what I was saying. So the reason I wrote the book, The Art of Enough, is because I think there are real connections between this sort of philosophical worldview thing that we're talking about here is absolutely the context we're all in. And then when I would coach people, I coach senior leaders across all sorts of different organisations. You don't
have to mention any names, by the way.
I'm not going to mention any names. I take the oath of confidentiality. I can't. I'd be sacked by all my clients if I did. Quite rightly. I have loads of people I speak to say, I don't feel like I'm good enough, or there is something that holds me back from being good enough that sort of resides internally. So there are lots of people who have their own
imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome, or a sense,
really?
Yes, or a sense of having to prove themselves because they've come from tough origins, whether that be physically tough or psychologically or emotionally tough, that they've got to sort of prove themselves. And in some ways that can be quite useful, of course, because it really gives you that drive and that verve and all that. But out of control, it can be, really disabling internally. So there's a lot of people that I coach who don't feel like they are enough for a various range of reasons, or that they're stressed or anxious, all those things. And then there are people the world over who are working too hard and really struggling with a sense of burnout, or there's a burnout epidemic in corporate land, but the world over actually, and that somehow we're not able to healthily navigate what it takes to our relationship with work and not work. And I'm not talking here about sometimes really just putting your head down and working hard on a project that you love, because we all have phases of that, hopefully. I'm talking about then being able to take a break and just sort of balance it so that you're not only working. So that's
changed, hasn't it? Don't you think it's changed? So certain generations have still got that kind of, maybe that work ethic that's got handed down from their parents. Naming no names or naming no generations. But then you've got the you could say the more recent generations, the Gen Zs of this world, are saying, well, I'm not, I don't live to work. I work to live.
Yeah.
I know from personal experience of some other organisations, not the organisation I'm involved in, but where the leadership has really struggled with that kind of mentality because they just don't think they're committed to the organisation, but they just have a different perspective on it. And
I think that's right.
I don't know if you've seen that in your coaching or your leadership stuff that you've seen, where people are anxious about, why is this person not performing like I expect them to do, like I used to do when I was younger? That kind of dialogue or narrative, I just find it amazing.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And I think it's especially in certain sectors. So there are certain sectors of people who spent the first 20, 25 years of their working lives working really hard so that they could become the partner or get to the top, and then they sort of relax a little bit. But the ethic, the drive is you've got to put in all the hours, and they did it, so they want those who come after
do the hard yards, so to
do the hard yards, exactly. And that kind of worked for them because, well, that's how they did it. So that was their rules of belonging for those generations. And now there's a sort of disenfranchisement that I see with Gen Z, which is we're never going to be able to afford our own houses. We're all screwed with loads of debt. There's a sort of cynical, slightly wounded.
It's like a fragmentation piece, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So I kind of think it's not that generation. Of course, there are plenty of people in that generation who are desperately wanting to be vocational and do the best they can and work as hard as they can. But they're also they're just not buying into the same model of it somehow. So it's a different way of looking at it. For them, they're looking at potentially, how can I do enough, but not too much? They're not buying into I'm going to burn out here because they don't see it as, the cost and gain doesn't seem right. I think it's a really interesting time actually in organisations, and I wonder how it'll play out. But I can see it causing friction in organisations, very much so.
Well, because you've got certain generations now that that will be near or at retirement age, so to speak, or they'll be looking at a different vocation for their time on this planet. And then you've got the people that we just talked about, are the high, as we calling GE, the high pots, the high potentials. But then how do you retain the high potentials? Because they are seeking a different environment in that organization structure. And can the organization be flexible enough to adapt or die? It's like, this is the thing, because they're getting to they'll be getting more responsibility, but then also, do they want it? Do they actually push back on it and say, I don't want that? So I agree, it's a melting pot. It's a real melting pot. And especially in the next 5 to 10 years, I think up to 2030, it's going to be, because they're really getting into their kind of, the time when I presume they'll be in the 20s and 30s. And then do they then have a family? Do they, in quote marks, settle down? Do they have kids? It's like, do they go down the traditional, you could say, path that a number of other people have trod, or do they just completely check out from that? I mean, what I've noticed is, knowing some digital nomads across the world now from some stuff I did last year, where I spoke at a conference in the summer in not in Europe, but just outside Europe. And, the diversity of people that are now classifying themselves as digital nomads, and literally they just have no home at all. Yeah. And they're just continually traveling all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a like, oh my God, wow. But amazing people, amazing skills, amazing talent, amazing knowledge. And they're basically going, well, they're giving a certain sign to the organization saying, these are the terms of how I engage with you. And actually, the organizations are, in a number of times, if you're not entrepreneurs, they're actually bending to accommodate that person because that person's so talented.
Totally.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's
really
interesting. And I also think, I wonder what we can learn from that generation, what it's really asking. So the question I'm really exploring, or just continuing to sort of travel with, is how can you be a successful and healthy organization? I mean, I think we can ask it of ourselves. How can we be successful, whatever that means for us, and healthy? And I think that's what that sort of caricature of Gen Z is asking. It's like, how can we have a good working life and not not do that thing of I've got to do 60 hours a week.
It's the and versus the or, isn't it?
Exactly. And you kind of think that there's something very wise about that approach, but of course it really is very, very challenging for people who had to do it the different way. And it's a bit like, you want a sort of companion in suffering. If you've had to suffer to get to where you are in life, you kind of want the people after you to have to do the same hard yards. And they're going,
it's like
doing it.
You're like the kind of the milliner. Hey, Sonny, it's like I work for 56. It's like a Monty Python. It's like a Monty Python sketch. I cut myself in half with a bread knife. I danced over my bread singing Hallelujah.
Yeah, you were lucky. Yeah, that one. I know. I had
to drink a bottle of sulfuric. I'm going to go do for you. I can drink a bottle of sulfuric acid. Yeah. Okay, I bet you did.
Exactly, and there's balance to be struck, and I think that we're in a time in the world, but also in organisations and in individual lives where people are seeking balance. They're seeking and the pulls on us and on our resources are so huge and so diverse that actually this conversation about what enough means, how does it feel if I feel like I am enough so I don't overcompensate and try and prove myself and then burn out to belong to a company, because that's what you have to do around here. How we can then have a healthy conversation about what we need to do for the planet to keep it thriving and alive, rather than any kind of whatever might happen. What does it mean at both personal level, organizational level, and societal and planetary level to be healthy and to live within healthy limits, what I call healthy limits, but people hate the idea of limits. So, I try and say, to live healthily and be successful, to thrive, maybe that's better.
Where is your moat?
Yes. Yeah, nice. Where's your moat? Assuming you're in the castle, not on the other side of it.
That's where you get jettisoned. Like you're throwing in those kind of those big catapults. There's so much to talk about with you. So it's fantastic. We talked a bit earlier about imposter syndrome. We talked a bit about Carol Dweck. The thing about growth versus fixed mindset. Are we saying with the Gen Zs, are they more of a fixed mindset, or have they got a growth mindset? Are they're more fixed on compartmentalizing their work versus their life? And if you think about Russian dollar example, the association is that you have the dominant model before was you have work, and then within work you have life. Yeah.
Yes.
And they're reversing it and saying you have work within life. Yeah. And it's not the only Russian doll you have in the Russian doll, if you know what I mean. You have all the things that you want to do. It's I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of going off on one there, but I don't think it's definitely a different perspective on this kind of what is growth and what is fixed, because I just saw observations where they just kind of like they said, look, I'm not working till 9 o'clock at night. I'm working till 5 or 6 latest, and then I'm out of here. You're not gonna. I don't care what you're doing. I'm gone. Which kind of you could say could be a fixed mindset. But actually, they're putting boundaries. That like the moat analogy, they're putting boundaries around their world, aren't they?
I mean, I think I'd be wary of saying that any whole generation is one thing or another. But I would also say that that you've got anything that's sort of fixed, that's rigid, becomes divisive. And so what you would want, of course, is a conversation with that person who says, I'm leaving at 5. Of course, we all know, and I know this as somebody who's employed people and somebody who's been employed, that you want a conversation to go, look, okay, if you really need me to stay till 9 o'clock for this project that I really want to support, I'll do it, but I'm not going to do it every night. I'll do it tonight, and then maybe I'll take some time off later in the week. You want it to be a fluid conversation. I think the idea of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset is more about whether or not you believe there's the potential for movement and growth. And if you are a fixed mindset, would be that you just believe that there's this fixed asset levels.
There's no way. So what you're saying is there's no way of self-development.
Yeah. So you could say, if you say I can't do maths, then that's a fixed mindset. or I can't learn languages, so it's often used in the context of sort of learning subjects, because Carol Dweck was an educational psychologist. I mean, that's where she that's her domain, really. But so she did all the research about children, and literally there is this her research led her to believe that if a child believed that they could learn something, they were more likely to learn it. For children who believed that they couldn't, they wouldn't. So it's sort of really a whole piece. It's a metaphor, really, for your limiting assumptions. If you believe you can do something, you're more likely to be able to do it. Yeah.
One of the things I know that in each of the chapters that you talk about with your book, you've got kind of like practices that you recommend and also actions. So one of the things I love with you actually jump back into a really funky film called Emotions, the Pixar film.
Yes. Yeah.
What was the reason for using that? I mean, that's a very colourful, creative kind of treatment by Steve Jobs, God bless his soul, one of his companies.
Yeah, that's right.
So what was the thinking behind that use of that?
Well, partly everything about my book is trying to be really accessible and practical. So that's partly because that's how I wanted it to be, and also I didn't want it to be just a book for business leaders. I wanted it to be a book for anybody. It's kind of got a generic theme to it. And I really like that Pixar film because it's just such a brilliant depiction of both emotions, but also of neuroscience. I mean, it's really, really well researched. I just went and saw last year, I think, or a couple of years ago, but Inside Out 2 came out, and it's just brilliant. And it's a very, very clever way of making how our memories are made, how we respond to things, basically all the things that go on in our brain, bring it into real life. And, I think one of the lovely things that's happened in the last 20 years or so is that since there's been fMRI scans that we can know what's being activated in our brain, we're less sort of, we just know more about how our brains work. So we know about neuroplasticity, we know about triggers, we know about the amygdala, we know about, all the sort of chemicals, serotonin, cortisol, all that stuff. So with something like the Inside Out movie, it's just a brilliant way of making it really of depicting how our brains work. So very often, if we're in a situation of stress, we'll just go into fight, flight, freeze mode, which in the Pixar movie would mean that the little angry figure or the little sad figure have taken over the controls, and all they're doing is wanting to do that. And we all can recognize that in ourselves, can't we? I mean, I guess we've all been in meetings where somebody either patronizes us or cuts us over or cuts us off.
Yeah, we have a trigger moment.
Yeah, that's it. And all you want to do is, punch that person or run out crying, or you freeze. It's fight, flight, freeze. We know, and now we know that there's a biology to that, and that's a sort of human condition. So, yeah, I'm very, very interested, especially when I'm talking to leaders, but anybody really, but in what state we're in. I think, people, this is a bit of a diversion from your question, but people ask me all the time, what does it take to be a good leader? What do you need to know? And, I've got hundreds of books on my bookshelf about that, and I've studied it myself. But increasingly, I think what you need to be able to do is manage your state so you are open and ready for pretty much anything. But because the world's so chaotic and
situational leadership.
Situational, and there's been lots of talk over the years about VUCA, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and whatever the A is, can't remember.
The Navy SEALs situation.
Yeah, that's right. And of course we know that that's the word. That's our lived experience. So actually, I think as a leader, it's so much about behavioral psychology. It's about how you manage people. It's how you engage with people. And actually, given that we're in a sort of perma crisis, where there's crisis after crisis after crisis, a surprise after surprise after surprise, since certainly in the last, God, it was like that before COVID, but the last 5 years, if you think, whoa, there have been so many big world events that have impacted on all of us. If you're leading in that context, how do you? And I think it's almost going back to, God, it's made me think of that Rudyard Kipling poem, if a man can keep his head, if there's that poem, if you can keep your head when all around them are losing theirs.
Well, to my mind, I think it's leading with authenticity and empathy and honesty and transparency.
Mm-hmm.
but also taking people with you. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
Tesco, when I was there, they were very, very on that, about
Yeah.
living the values and taking
Yeah.
people with you, because there was a huge workforce, like,
Yeah.
over
Totally.
500,000 people working for Tesco
Yeah.
globally. I don't know how many it is, probably more than that now, but
Yeah.
obviously I didn't have 500,000 people working for me, but it's, just thinking through the ramifications of that, it's huge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So all of those things, being able to really relate to people, and then also be able to manage crisis without it, just managing your, so you're open, and all of those things are really important.
Well, yeah, I mean, we got some training on dealing with trigger moments. So you get like an inbound email that's like, wow,
Yes.
it's like, nuclear, right? You get somebody say something to you in a board meeting, nuclear. You get a team member say something to you that's nuclear. How do you how do you process that? How do you consume it and process it? And how do you what's your next action? And
Exactly.
how do you live the values in that context? Because sometimes it's pretty challenging.
Totally. And of course it is, because this is back to the inside out thing, because your amygdala has been triggered and your prefrontal cortex is gone. I always describe it as flipping your lid. You've given yourself a DIY frontal lobotomy, and all you can think of is fight, flight, freeze. That's the energy in the brain goes there.
What they talked about was, I remember they talked about this kind of downward spiral. They kind of like, because your mind plays a trick on you. But if this happens, and then this could happen, and this could happen, and this could happen, and this could, and if you let it run away with itself, it's like you're in a very bad state. Choose your attitude. They used to say, choose your attitude.
Choose your attitude. And I would also add to that, manage your state. So actually, the thing that I've done lots of training and work in is breath work. And people always go, don't be so hippie, you don't need to know about breathing. But of course you do, because the one thing, that the quickest way you can calm your amygdala and return your energy to your prefrontal cortex is by taking
breathe
3 to 5 really, really good breaths. Box breaths, all of that, any of the things you've got. So it's sort of just understanding that neurobiology is part of the mix, and it's really useful. It's for those leaders
if you're really into it, you could ring up Wim Hof. Hey Wim, yeah, and you can say, I'm going to jump in the ice bath now, yeah,
exactly.
Or I'm going to go up a mountain with no.
Yeah, exactly. And he won't let anyone do anything until he's taught them his breathing method. That's what gets him through. I mean, I'm not quite as extreme as him, but it's huge value in it. Yeah. Are you an ice bath man, Andrew?
I have been in them, but I did not purchase one.
No.
I think there's been a mad. I mean, I can't believe. I think you spend like tens of thousands of pounds on an ice bath now. Carved by Vikings in the Nordics somewhere.
Yeah.
It's quite incredible. Or you can buy $49.99, on the internet.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll stay up. Hopefully it'll stay up when you're actually in the ice bath. You never know.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things also I think that was very interesting in your book was about identity and purpose and values, and we touched on a little bit just now. Could you tell the audience about the Alfred Nobel story? Because that blew my mind when I read that. I mean, it's such a, if you don't know that story and then you read it in your book and you go, wow, I never knew that. That's incredible.
Yeah, so it's a sort of moment of truth story. So Alfred Nobel was sitting at his breakfast table in Paris where he lived, and he opened the newspaper, and to his surprise and I imagine horror, he saw his own obituary. And what had happened was that his brother had died, and in error, the journalist thought that it was him who died, and they had written an obituary. And the headline of the obituary is, in French, "The agent of death is dead." Because he, up until that point, had been famous and had made all his money by building and by manufacturing dynamite. So he was an arms dealer in the 19th century in across Europe. And he was so upset by this not particularly flattering obituary of him, which sort of caricatured him as this sort of deathmonger, that he dedicated the rest of his life to changing his legacy. And he happened to live for 7 years longer than that and had the time to set up the prizes, peace prizes and literature prizes, etc. And that's his legacy. So now when you think, who's Alfred Nobel? You think of the prizes, right? You might not have known that. And I love that story as well, because I think what an amazing moment that must have been for him, where he goes, this is not what I want to be known as. This is not who I am. And, the question I would ask is, what's your moment of truth? What's your moment? How do you want to be remembered, recognized? What do you want your contribution to be? And it doesn't have to be a big grand, not all of us are loaded enough or in a position to set up an international prize, but we can get really clear about what our purpose is, get really clear about what our values are, and clear about what we would like our contribution to be, so that we don't have that moment close to the end of our careers or of our lives even, where we go, God, I wish I hadn't done it like that. I wish I'd done this. I think it's really important and a great opportunity. So I'm a big fan of really spending time with going, what really matters to me? How do I want that to then present itself in terms of my moral compass, my true north, call it what you will, so that I can tether my activity to what it is I'm trying to do in the world.
Well, I'm pleased to tell you that you're now part of my legacy already. So, the G&T Sessions Foundation.
Hey, yeah.
You're now carving it out into the stone here, recording this episode.
I'm so happy to be part of it, Andrew. Really, I'm serious about that. It's brilliant what you're doing. It's really
good.
Because
it's like I know I won't talk about that now, but that's true. I mean, that's part of the reason why I have want to get certain people on the show, because it's like it's there's some timeless, thoughtful, impactful content that I would want people to listen to and learn from. And I consider the work that you've done is being fundamental in this area to that. And obviously you're explaining the stuff as you go through it. So yeah, there you go. We got to set the G&T Foundation. You just drink gin and tonic all the time. No, I'm joking.
Well, we could do that and do all the good.
Oh yes, sorry. Secret. One of the other people that I know personally, that I know is big in this kind of area of evolving into presence, is a guy called Stephen Kotler, that I spent crazy 42 weekends, 40 hours with him on a Zoom call, which I think about now. I think I must be crazy a couple of years ago. But he obviously got inspired by Mikhail, unpronounceable surname, Mr. Flo.
She sent me high.
Yeah, you see, I knew you'd save me then. I knew you'd save me. But that's obviously the kind of the thing about, how you connect the heart and the brain. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know I know you touched on some of the things about the chemical reactions as well. Any thoughts on? I mean, I know you mentioned about breathing. We also mentioned about dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin and stuff like that, because that's actually quite interesting. About could you just explain what those relate to? Dopamine is what dopamine is.
Dopamine, dopamine, serotonin are often the sort of reward chemicals. So I'm not a biologist, so I'm going to be doing this in a very sort of layperson's terms. I'm not going to be, but serotonin and dopamine and DHEA is another one. They're all drugs that reward the brain. Dopamine especially rewards us doing something. So in the tech world, the phones are when you get a little message, you get a little dopamine hit. That's why they're so addictive. Actually, that's why, because we make us feel a bit better. But serotonin,
that's like me in the G&T sessions. It's like I get a hit. You see, it's like addicted to it. I'm joking.
Well, it's a good thing. I mean, they're reward mechanisms in the system. And of course, the lovely thing about those, and oxytocin's another one. Oxytocin's the sort of what do you call them, hormone that makes you feel a touchy feel. You get an oxytocin hit when you give someone a hug or something like that. And they're all really important because they keep us connected and they keep us feeling good and positive and well. And the more difficult hormones, you get it from feeling down, but feeling stressed. And the problem with cortisol is that you end up with, if you have an elevated level of cortisol in your system, it's hard to metabolize. It doesn't go away. And so, we all get a little boost of cortisol first thing in the morning. It gives us energy. But if you have too much of it, it means that, which you do when you're stressed, it means that when you wake up in the middle of the night, you can't go back to sleep, for example, or you feel anxious all the time. The nice thing about it is that they work in balance with one another. The hormone DHEA actually is one of the, which is a positive hormone. It's connected with our serotonin, etc. It metabolizes cortisol. So we kind of want to elevate. We want to consciously put ourselves into a position where we're feeling grateful or happy or just good about things. And that helps get rid of cortisol, as does Mr. Wim Hof again. The reason they're so popular is because they absolutely zap cortisol, because they help you to have a big flood of it and then get rid of it. Yeah, the reason that those things, I mean, they're important because going back to Mr. Csikszentmihalyi, I'm just showing off that I can say it. I did a talk once and I had to say his name, so I Googled loads how to pronounce it. That's why I
like to break it down. Yeah.
Yeah. He was a Hungarian, then moved to America. I think he was Hungarian or Czechoslovakian. Forgive me if I've got that wrong. But anyway, he was from that part of the world and then became a famous psychologist in the States. And his seminal book is called Flow. You know, flow is when you're, we all know kind of what that means. It's when you sort of lose any sense of time. You're just so in the moment and in the thing you're doing. So, I don't know, watching Roger Federer play tennis or any tennis player, you can see when they're in flow. That's all that's happening for them. And that's the state we're all after, really, in life. It's a beautiful thing because you're so absorbed in the moment of what you're doing.
Yeah, in the current tense.
Exactly. So it's all connected. And of course, it's very hard to get into flow if you've got too much cortisol going through your system. So you want to feel at ease, you want to feel healthy, you want to manage your breathing, and then you're more likely to be open to being able to be in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, moving on from there, I mean, I think one of the things that also I loved was there's actually some really good actions. And this is about boundaries. There's two things which I just really loved was the stop doing list, rather than the start doing list. Right, well, what I'm going to stop doing, and also the keep a no journal. So what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, well, the stop doing list, I have to say, wasn't my idea. I nicked it from Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great, and he a brilliant man, and I love the idea of it. I was like, why didn't that take off? Everything else in Good to Great, everyone talks about all the time, but no one does that. The idea. But he also says, which I re-quote all the time, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have no priorities. You say that, if I say that to the exec teams I work with, and they all laugh as though I've just said something really whimsical and true, but it is true. You can't, either you prioritize or you don't. And that's a big problem that people have, and all of us, because there's just too much to do. And so one of the reasons, so I was thinking, how can you make that applicable? So the no journal is, you write it's really sort of making very clear the cost and the gain for of doing something. So if you decide not to do something, you write down what you've said no to, and that's really an acknowledgement of the fact that it's really awkward often to say no to things. It makes you feel a bit embarrassed or a bit it's difficult to do. But you write it down, what you've said no to. You write down how you feel about it, how that went, and you can sort of go, God, that was really awful. I think I might lose my job, and blah blah blah. All the sort of splurgy feelings. But then you write down how you feel. 10 minutes later, actually, it's passed. I feel okay now. And then you write down what you've done with the time that you saved by saying no to the thing you didn't want to do.
Interesting.
So you're getting really clear about what it is you want to do. You're getting really clear about the positive reward. And it sort of links right the way back to serotonin. You're giving yourself a big old dopamine pat on the back for saying something that's difficult. So you're sort of retraining your brain a little bit and your system, but also just getting clear about what you want to say yes to. That's the other way I like to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, the only example I can use is from a previous team that I used to run. Was they want to start lots of things, they want to continue lots of things, and they never want to stop anything, and they never want to put anything down the drain, and they never want to put anything in the car park. Apart from that, it was fine. So the prioritization worked really well.
Exactly. Exactly. That's every team I work with. Yeah. It's so true. It's really hard. And I really like. I recently read, a couple of years ago, but it's a good book. 10,000 Weeks, or is it 20,000 Weeks? Oliver Burkeman. Anyway, it's the number of weeks we've got to live on this earth.
God, right. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's 20,000. Let's be optimistic. But anyway, one of the things he says, which I really liked, is that the challenge with life now isn't that we have to make choices between things that are really important and then things that are less important. Like that old analogy of, you fill the vase with big stones and then little stones and then sand. And if you filled it with sand, you can't put the big things in. So it's like, it's not that we have to choose between the little things and the big things. It's that everything that we might want to do is a big thing. And that sometimes the things we have to choose between are things that we really want to do. So that's when it becomes difficult. And that's why I think people are really bad at letting go of things, because they're their pet projects, or they're things that would be also really good. And we're not very good at letting go of things that we like the idea of. And I think when I think of prioritizing now, I put it less in terms of make sure you don't spend the whole day doing your emails, because for some people it's that. A lot of the time it's not. It's now going, okay, of the 5 really good projects you really want to do, which ones are you going to stop doing or phase out? Or we're just not very good at doing that. I think we've become collectively bad at it. I see it in every organisation I work in, whatever the sector. It's really difficult.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of baggage that needs to be jettisoned.
Yeah. I think people are perhaps. I don't say this as a criticism because I include myself in this, but I think we're not very good at holding a sort of robust boundary about saying, look, we'd love to do these 3 things, but actually we're not going to do those 3 things all at once. We're going to do one this year, one next year, one the year after, or we're going to just not do the 3rd thing at all. We're just going to do the 2, and that'll have the really good impact. There's this sort of greediness, and it comes right back to enough. It's like going, we can't do everything.
It comes back to enough, and it comes back to discipline, and it also comes back to, unfortunately, it comes back to also placing big bets, rather than hedging.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you hedge too much, and none of it comes in. Yeah.
And I get, there's obviously calibrations for all of that, especially for, your world of being a founder for startups and tech. God, that's absolutely, I'm sure that there are calibrations of that all the time.
Yeah, there's a constant prioritization. I think that's the thing, but then also you've got to be brave to place those bets and commit.
Absolutely.
And that it might fail. Yeah, and dealing with failure, and dealing with rejection, and all those kind of things that are associated with that. All those negative things that we don't talk about on this show. No, not at all. No, it's not allowed. Stop it.
No, don't do that. Whatever.
So I know that. So I mean, I won't go through all of them, but there's a lot of exercises. There's a lot of action stuff in your book. One of the ones that I really loved in the exercises was build your enough resource team. How would you? I know we go back to somebody that you mentioned a bit earlier, but that would be really good to talk people through, because I think it links to the kind of thing we just talked about people and prioritization, and maybe say back to the No Journal as well.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I would say that there's 2 ways. I think I say this is right. If you are in a leadership position or any position and you've got a team, make sure you've got the right people in the team. I spend a lot of my time working with especially leadership teams, and I really believe that giving good quality attention to how you work together, being the right people on the bus, as Jim Collins again, but making sure that you're all working in service of the whole, that you've got really good clarity about what you all contribute to the team. You trust each other, you can disagree well, all of that good stuff. You role model, you back each other, all of that. So there is something that very, very important. Sorry.
So would you call that the house rules or the team house rules? Or
Absolutely. Contracting,
behaviors.
Absolutely. And what you're going to commit to. And I think that's really, really useful. And then if it's an inner thing, I mean, so I think, yes, absolutely make sure you've got your right team and that they're solid, they're tight. And then there's the sort of inner resource team, which is a more sort of psychological or personal thing, which is who are your champions? Who are the people who will back you and have backed you in the past? And, I sometimes, if I'm feeling a little bit nervous, but so I'm doing a big talk and I'm feeling a little bit nervous, I might write down the name of a couple of people who've really supported me in my life and just write the names down on a bit of paper and put them in my pocket. So I've got them there. I'm consciously sort of drawing on the people who've got my back. So there's a sort of inner way of doing this, which I really like. Because I thought you were going
to do like like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Chris Tarrant thing. That is about you're going to ring up or something.
Yeah.
I'm just about to go on stage to 10,000 people.
Yeah. What shall I do? Yeah, exactly.
No, but put in those people's names. I suppose you're putting the energy in your pocket, aren't you? And
totally
they're with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and they could be, they could be people like your granny who's not even with you anymore, or they could be someone more contemporary, or just a colleague. So I mean, there's that, which is the sort of inner work. But I'm really, all the work I do with senior teams is based around making sure that the relationships are good, that you've got the right house rules, that you've got an agreement that you are going to, in public, disagree in private and support each other in public, and make sure who knows what they're doing. Everyone knows what they're doing for the teams. So there's plenty of really good research on that, and it's so it's often something that people think is a bit sort of indulgent, and yet it is the thing that when teams go wrong, it's because relationships have gone wrong. It's not because people don't know what the strategy is, because they do. So
it's a bit you've got to invest in. You've got to invest the time.
I agree. Yeah, very much so, and make sure that you've got people at the lower level, at the level below, who you can delegate to. So that all the research would be for leadership teams is that strategic leadership teams or senior leadership teams should be spending 60% of their time on strategy, on keeping the things on track, and not on the operations. And that's not because operations are less important. It's just that's the bit that should sort of run itself. And that's a very difficult dance for leaders these days, because people are just nearly always more operational than they could be.
I suppose it depends on what their history is, because sometimes maybe they come from operational roles, they've been put into a board role, and then their Linus blanket is operations.
Exactly.
But actually, they feel in this kind of what do you say? The air is slightly different in the boardroom. That they sometimes find it challenging because they don't know how to operate. But then also that's where coaching comes in, isn't it? Because it's like about how to be effective in the boardroom and how to build the relationships, etc., etc. But I agree with you. I think it also depends on the different type of business as well. So
of course,
certain businesses are very, very operational,
or very lean.
They're very lean, exactly. Yeah, really. And they also expect absolute minutiae of detail to be known by all the exec, all level of detail.
Yeah,
mentioned no names, but I might have mentioned that company a bit earlier, and that's that's why my hair was brown before I joined that company, I think. Anyway,
I love that you mentioned Linus blanket as well. I pick up that I love
Charlie Brown,
a bit of Charlie Brown, a bit of Snoopy.
There's two other concepts I wanted to talk about briefly. Was the donut thinking and create your own enough donut. Could you talk us through that? And then I've got one other final one as well, which is great. You've got so many great stuff in it. So I could spend. We could have like a 3-hour like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan. You're not going to have Becky on your show because she's on my show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I chose well.
5 hours later.
Thank you. I'm glad it's useful, because I'm a big sort of, as you can tell, I like theories, and I wanted to signpost people to what's most useful. The donut thing comes from an economist called Kate Raworth, who wrote a book called Donut Economics, which is really a great book. And it's sort of, she's an Oxford professor, she teaches it. I live in Oxford, she teaches in Oxford. And her concept of economics is that there's a sort of inner limit. It's a bit like Maslow, actually. There's an inner limit where everybody on the planet needs to have a level of food, water, cleanliness, schooling, education, that sort of. So there's sort of minimum limit. And then there's the outside the donut. The outside of the donut is the sort of planetary limits, really, the sort of or are the natural limits to humankind. So they could be the fact that there are only 24 hours in the day, or it could also be, that if we use too much of one, too much carbon, we'll deregulate the system, or cut down too many trees, we have trees, that sort of thing. So the sort of planetary boundaries, and she uses the sort of well-known ones. And so inside the donut is the sweet spot, and we should all be going for the sweet spot, which is how we can all thrive. So her whole premise of her work is, how can we create an economic system where everybody on the planet thrives? You haven't got some who barely survive and some people who have so much more than they need that it's.
I think I was going to say on that point. I think some people missed the memo when she sent that memo out. I think some people missed that memo.
Yeah, I think they might have done. I don't think. I mean, I think there are some people who've really taken it on, and plenty who haven't. I think that's true, but. So I really like that. I think that it makes sense to me because I'm a pragmatist, really, and it kind of like, yeah, go figure. It'd be really nice, wouldn't it be, that if everyone had enough and that we all just sort of managed to focus on thriving. Again, it goes back to this focus on thriving and wholeness, not just on surviving and more. And so I sort of invite people to think about, what would your version of that be? So it's a bit like that very first conversation we had when we started talking today about Charles Handy, and what's your upper limit, what's your lower limit? Make sure that you are in the middle of those two things, and then what will that make possible for you? What will you then focus your time and energy on, and what would it take for you to really think about what else would you include in your donut, which would make you live a sort of happy and full life? So it's a sort of, again, a guided reflective practice process, riffing on that model, which is, I kind of like to use sort of models that are informed by really good thinking, but that's sort of adapted to more pragmatic personal use.
That's great. Thanks for explaining that. I just love the things you can hang your hat on, so to speak. I think it's probably a way the words to say. The last one I wanted to talk to you about was letter to your descendants.
Yeah.
Which is
yeah. It is. It really is, and it's sort of again, it's quite a little bit similar to the old to Alfred Nobel, isn't it? But it's such a lovely idea. This idea of cathedral thinking, So Gaudi, who's just about to become a saint, I think, who did the what's it called, the Sagrada Familias in Barcelona, the big cathedral.
The rebuilding quite a lot.
Yeah, that's taken over 130 years. It's incredible, and he did that. And so I think it's a very sobering thing to do, but also a really, really brilliantly helpful thing to do, to write a letter to your descendants. And when I did it, I made myself do it to not just my grandchild, my great-grandchild. So you have to really imagine that. So my daughters are both in their 20s and so I'm thinking, 60 years hence, when there might be a great-grandchild, who knows, maybe 80, who knows? But that's a long time. That's next century, right? What would I want what would I want for their lives? What would I hope for them? And it's just a great exercise in giving yourself the long view to think about it's less about what I hope they remember me for and more about what I hope for them. And therefore, how can I contribute to that long view in terms of
what can I do today that can help?
Today? Yeah, it's a great exercise. It's a really good thought exercise, I think.
I mean, it's also, do you do that with leadership teams before, and then you get them to share it as stuff like that you've done?
Yeah, and you could do it about it's a bit like when I first started sort of leadership training, people used to get people to write postcards to themselves that they'd stamp, and then I'd send back to them, in 6 months' time or a year's time. It's a bit like a longer version of that. What would your letter to your successes be in a business 30 years time? You could just do it, give yourself one generation of it. What do you hope for this organization in 30 years time? What would you hope for it to be? And it gives you a great long view, because I think partly because the world is so short term that it just gives you a pause to think, okay, how can we allow ourselves that sort of longer term view? And it's sort of, it feels a bit indulgent and countercultural, but it actually might help you discover something about yourself that you want to change or just sort of adapt a little bit.
Just a quick question. So you use that phrase, cathedral thinking. Is that what you're talking about? It's like big thinking, basically, around the future. Is that what you?
Long-term thinking about the thing. Yeah. So the people who wrote I don't think there are any of the. As soon as I say this, someone will tell me I'm wrong. But most cathedrals, certainly most of the medieval cathedrals of Europe, took over 100 years to build. So that's 3 generations of workmen in those days, wouldn't have been? Maybe 4. And there are probably exceptions, like Coventry Cathedral didn't take that long, but most did. So that thing of going, it's a bit like planting an oak tree, isn't it? You're like, I'm never going to see the oak tree, but that sort of long-term legacy thinking is such a gift in today's very immediate world, I think.
Well, I mean, yeah. No, thanks for explaining that. I mean, I think what a great way as well to wrap up this episode. I mean, it's like, what a great way to people to take away cathedral thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was always when I'm in Barcelona, I go and see the Gaudi Cathedral, and it's just it's very inspirational, especially at night, so it's lit up and stuff like that. Yeah, they seem to be rebuilding it all the time, but yeah, truly amazing.
Yeah, I find it really moving that people are still building it. And so that legacy from him designing it to people still building it now is wonderful, isn't it?
Exactly. It can only get better. So thank you. Much gratitude to you, Becky Hall.
Thank you, Andrew,
for coming on today's show. And in terms of obviously people wanting to know more about you, wants to get hold of the book, obviously I can put the book link in the when we publish it very soon.
Thank you.
What's the best way of getting hold of you or getting your superpowers in their organisation?
Yeah, well, obviously by the book, it's on Audible too, and it's just been translated, I'm very excited, into Portuguese, so it's in sale in Brazil, and in Chinese, Cantonese, so you can buy it in China and Brazil if you are those language speakers. Not that I am, so you're on your own if you want to speak.
Is there a particular reason for those countries?
Just those are the publishers who've bought it and translated it. So
okay.
But more pragmatically, I've got a website called www.presence.uk.net, which you can put in the link. So you could always email me, get in touch with me by that socials. I'm on LinkedIn, Becky Hall, and Instagram, Becky Hall at enough, and Substack. Although you and I were talking, Andrew, about Substack, and I've sort of got an account which I'm just determined to write more on. So maybe having said this on your podcast, it'll propel me into the discipline of writing every week. But
well, that'd be interesting. That'd be interesting. Yeah. It's an interesting process. It's when you want to do something, it's amazing what time you can create, which means you've got to get up earlier.
Of course, that's true. And I the other thing to say is I love doing talks. I do speak. I do talks in events and things like that. So just get in touch and have that conversation.
Fantastic. Well, that was Becky Hall, author of what would you call it?
The Art of Enough.
The Art of Enough. That's it. The Art of Enough. Oh, there you go. See,
there it is.
Something she just had in her. You just had something. Normally people put it over their left shoulder or their right shoulder or something like that. So The Art of Enough. And thank you for coming on the show today. I'm glad we got it. We got it 100% complete.
Yes.
And and this will be coming to YouTube and all audio platforms. And also, I've imported my podcast into Substack as well. So it also now comes on Substack as well. So, people actually have done downloads from previous episodes of on Substack.
That's
so the G&T sessions are now on Substack under my own name, andrewjturner.substack.com. You heard it here first. Thank you, Becky, today. I appreciate it. And that was Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. We continue into the future, and who knows what the rest of 2025 will bring, but obviously the art of enough is something you need to think about.
Let's hope so. It's been lovely talking to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky.